So welcome, Julie, and thank you for doing this for us today. It's wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I have to say I've really enjoyed preparing for this today because I went right back to the very beginning and dug out some quilts that I'd forgotten I even made. Some of you may remember my mum, Chris Tasker. She was a very active member of Qld Quilters. She passed away 8 years ago this week. But Mum taught me how to sew. So she was a knitwork teacher back in the 80s. Did any of you ladies do knitwork? Yeah. So she taught hundreds of women how to sew clothes for their families, just in our garage. And she taught me to sew. And one of my earliest memories is of sewing with a little plastic toy thing that just made holes in paper. But I just love that memory of sitting next to Mum on a little mini table. She had her banana going, I was sewing and she was sewing. And she taught me to sew my own clothes, which I still do. And in about 1990, I think, one of her knitwork friends caught the patchwork bug. And as you know, it's highly contagious. So Mum caught it, and then she almost overnight stopped doing dressmaking and just started doing patchwork and quilting. And so she taught me to do patchwork way back in 1990. So this is my second quilt that I ever made, a sampler. Mum taught myself and a group of my friends on Saturday mornings how to do this, most of it by hand, and then we all entered it into the Harare Patchwork and Quilting Show. And then, can you believe it, in 1992, I actually did an art quilt. I didn't know that that's what it was at the time. The Save the Rhino people had just come to our school that year. The plight of the rhinos was just gaining traction at that time. And so I made that is the shape of the country of Zimbabwe where I'm from. In those days, we called this an innovative quilt rather than an art quilt. And then I did what was called needlework for my O-level exams, which is age 16, and made this little dress with some ribbon embroidery there. And we did this on hand singers that only went straight. And we had to do loop stitch by the kilometre, it felt like, to neaten the seams, and learn French seams for that. So I was so thrilled to dig that out to show you. And Fiona? Anyone who is friends with me on Facebook knows how much I love cats.
I love cats too.
So this one I made when I was 16 as a, would you call this one of a kind, I Spy type quilt, and all hands quilted as well. And Mum and I always used to joke that I can't cut or sew straight. So there's lots of fudging and I was just too impatient to fix it. If something desperately needed to be unpicked, Mum was my unpicker. And because my mum did so much traditional work, I followed her and tried to do things like this, which really wasn't a good idea because very few corners actually net. So,
well, I was going to say I can't see any.
well, I turned it into possibly what we would call an art quilt because every boo-boo had to be covered up with some sort of button or embroidery or something, so that it was no longer that traditional one had to cover up the mistakes.
Very innovative.
Yeah. And then I moved to Australia in 2006, very, very grateful to be in this country, but I kept hankering for Africa so much and kept making things like this.
That fabric's not African fabric, is it?
It's not, no, I bought it in Spotlight.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought I recognised something.
Yeah. And then I tried to be a little bit more accurate, but again, the gaps are shocking. And I remember Mum and I had some words about this one. Because I was just frustrated when I couldn't bring myself to unpick and do it properly. So that one, I had wanted to enter it into show, but I just couldn't. It was not done well enough.
Still keeps you
Very
warm.
African looking.
Very African. Yes.
Look at the back.
Oh, I love the back.
That's very modern.
Along the way, I joined a teddy bear making club and learnt to make all of these jointed teddies.
Oh, aren't you gorgeous?
Including a very tiny one.
Very cute.
And then I'd been here a few years and was in between jobs, and so I had time to go to a Benina Club meeting with my mum, where Bree in the Chermside shop was showing the felting attachment, the needle felting with your machine. And Mum told me that there was this thing called wet felting where you wet the wool and you roll it hundreds of times. And I screwed my nose up and thought, who on earth would want to do that? And I was quite impressed with what the attachment could do. So I bought the attachment and then went to Threads and More at Sherwood to buy the roving to do some of that. And in the shop I saw a sample of wet felting and I thought, oh, let's give that a go. And I was so lucky that the workshop was 2 weeks later. So I did this one, my first ever felted piece in that, just a couple of hours.
Julie,
I sent Mum a text message after about half an hour and I said, I'm addicted. And just have not been able to stop felting since.
So that was wet felted.
Wet felting. So you pull roving of wool, so it's wool that hasn't been spun into yarn. It's a bit like cotton wool. You pull out the fibres and lay out one layer and then another layer 90 degrees to that. Then you decorate it. This is a silk hanky. So that's one silk cocoon that's been pulled out into a square and dyed beautifully. That's silk tops. Some synthetic wool as well was on there. Other silk bits. And then you wet it down with warm soapy water and literally roll it hundreds of times. Yeah, so love felting. And then started to use that felting to make more blending the
Wow.
quilting with felting. So
I
these
remember that one.
shapes were cut out from silk and then put on just a clean background, so silk shapes, and then just felted. And then I needle punched these little bottom bits on, and also the handles, and then did some hand quilting, which was really hard because it was so thick.
That's fantastic. Wow.
Some of you might remember this from the Queensland Quilt Show quite some years ago. I think this is the first one I entered that year with that the felting.
Thanks.
Then I tried to capture Tuscany, where we went for a holiday a long time ago,
Beautiful.
doing pictures with the wool. That's got a little bit of felting on it, but also needle punched to hold it to that felt backing to create
sewing machine with you.
that Benina attachment.
Beautiful.
And then this was my first SOTA entry, also felted, using the silk hankies to create the vase and the flowers as well.
Love the clouds.
Wow.
And you can see I was pining after Africa. My original Africa was pretty huge, and I had to make sure that I did the same number of rolls this way and that way to not distort the shape of Africa. So the desert there is created with silk hankies and silk tops. This is actually quite a synthetic wool to do rivers, and another silk hanky. And then I searched online for lots of buttons. And then this is raw edge applique, just taken from some really beautiful prints of fabric. just with blinds affixed done on and then sewing out the edge. Lots of quilting here as well, and then that technique, that's bleach on the black fabric, which I learned at one of my first 2Q meetings a very long time ago. 2Q, AQ. That is Hessian, yeah.
And have you puffed the skirt signs of the ladies? They look from here, they look like they're popping out.
It's only because it's quite densely quilted around them,
just
that's
pop
all.
that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look pretty rounded, don't they?
Yeah, I thought they were just.
So I chose the Hessian because I needed something stronger to hold this heavy piece on the front, but also the colour and the texture adds so much to it as well. After my mum died, I could not go in the sewing room for about 2 years. It was really, really hard. And then Dad and I drove down to Melbourne for Christmas, and I came back and had a go again. This is just an example of how hard it was to get my mojo back. That I'd done a Lorraine Carthew workshop on the raw edge applique and doing pictures, and I was playing with some fabric paint to do the sky, which ended up helping me, which you'll see soon. But just I want to encourage you, when you lose your mojo, just give it a go, just keep going. And I haven't even put a hanging sleeve on this, I don't think I ever will, but it did serve a purpose in helping me get back into doing things. When I did get the mojo back, I started doing some portraits. That's my niece with our little cat Mally. And following from what I learned from Lorraine Carthew to do pictures with those little shapes, I had a play and I made that technique into my own with this one, which you would have seen in SOTA a couple of years ago. So it's the same thing of creating a picture, but using the little squares and using the colour value to do that. And then that led on to this one. So I was delighted with this piece, but I was disappointed with my quilting. So I was then on a mission to improve my quilting and went on some lessons with Jane Rundle and the wonderful Pam Hill as well, and have taken my quilting to a new level that I never ever thought would be possible. And in the felting, I went to do a workshop with Wendy Bailey, and she had a lady from Blue Mountains came up to do a 4-day workshop on creating a dress and then doing natural dyeing of the dress. So what we had to do was create, we had to create the fabric to make the dress first. So that was with silk, so this is Nuno felting, a layer of silk with wool on the other side. This also has got silk on the outside, silk chiffon, and then wool on the inside. So it's a seamless dress. And then we dyed all of this as well. And so we had a pattern to work from according to our measurements. And then we could do different things. It also has a pocket in there. So we spent 3 days creating the felt itself to then make the dress. And then on the last day, we put it in the pots with all the gum leaves. And it was like Christmas, opening up all these dresses at the end. And they were hot, trying not to burn our fingers, but to see what the gum leaves did on there. Lots of onion skins as well. Sadly, I haven't been able to wear it because I don't have the confidence to wear that to Woolies. I thought about wearing it once when I went to the theatre, but in Brisbane people wear jeans to the theatre, and I can't confidently wear that anywhere yet. Maybe I'll be able to wear it one day. So I was on a mission to improve my quilting, and following lessons, I have been able to achieve this, which I thought was only ever a dream. When I looked at quilts in the show and saw this level of quilting, I didn't think I could ever do it, and I wish that Mum could be able to see this. But just a lesson from mistakes, because I've done so much raw edge work over the years, I never ever thought to wash my fabrics before I used them. And then I got all excited when I saw this bird pattern, pulled pulled out the fabrics, made it, and I can never wash this because that colour is going to run. So that's learning from my mistakes as I go. This is my entry for the AQC magic theme that we had a few years ago. So I teach children with dyslexia, and I teach them about the neurons. I call this neuroplastic magic. I teach them that they were born with 100 billion neurons. We were all born with the same number. Every time we do something, we build a neural connection from one neuron to another. The more we do it, the stronger the neural connections become. And this is why I ask them to do their homework again and again and again every day, because we're changing their brain and they're building those neural connections to make reading easier. So I was really thrilled when that was successfully juried into that show and toured the country. COVID happened, and it was with Christine Lyons from the UK. She taught us to do cyanotopes on silk mainly, but also a bit on cotton. So that's my little Mally. And then just doing felting with those silk pieces.
Can't quite see. Oh, there it is.
So ahead of time, we sent Christine some photos of people and things and places that were important to us. And then she prepared we used photo negatives on slides to create that. And then that's my mum. And just learning just some slightly different techniques on how to do some felting with different pieces. At school doing a workshop and saw these enormous gum leaves. I had never seen them that big before. And so when I finished the workshop, I pulled off a branch of the tree, put it in the car and drove home. I didn't have time to do anything with the leaves that day, so I literally put them between sheets of newspaper under books, which kept them flat for more than a year before I got to fiddle with this, thinking about playing with the bleach on the black fabric and what it would do, and just love the effect of it. And that's a bit of felting there as well, and then some stitching. And I was loving it, and I didn't even think about what batten to use. For all my others, I've been doing a wool blend, so I did a wool blend. And then I started quilting, and I did notice as I was going a little bit of the wool coming through, but it didn't really register to be an alarm bell that this is a problem. I'm used to cat fur all over things, so I just thought it wouldn't be such a big deal. And then it became a very big deal, especially in the dense areas, and you can see at the back. So I used some leftovers for that backing. But this has been a disaster. And I sort of thought that I'll be able to salvage this. So I sat down with some tweezers and I pulled and I pulled and I pulled. And it didn't pull more out, which I thought it might, but there's just no way. I don't have time to pull out all of those.
You can't see them. I
can't see. So that will lead us into our sharing of things you've learned from mistakes, so that we can all not make the same mistakes again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.